It is, and this interview is being conducted by Roland Matthies with Charles B. Zimmerman, local barrister, in an effort for the Clark County Historical Society's archives to cover the legal profession and the system of justice in Clark County, while at the same time asking Mr. Zimmerman to cover the family history of the... Okay, Charles, you're on.
Thank you, Dr. Matthies. I'll start with the family involvement of First Lutheran Church to begin with. I was born on March 16, 1931. At that time, my grandfather and grandmother Zimmerman were both living. My grandfather Zimmerman had come to Wittenberg in 1877 after 2 years of not being in college and graduated from Wittenberg in 1879. And he came from a long line of Lutherans, and the rest of the family who followed him were all born into the Lutheran Church, and they all stayed there pretty much. I can relate this much about my grandfather. He was a very active person in the profession, legal profession, and at Wittenberg and at the First Lutheran Church. I only knew him as rather an old man. He died in 1942. In the last 5 or 6 years, he wasn't much good physically or mentally, but I do remember him. My own personal recollections of the church are going to Sunday school as a young boy. The first pastor I really remember was Dr. E. Clyde Vander, who I think he did not confirm me, but he did confirm my sister and possibly my brother who came after me. And we were pretty faithful attenders. A lot of times I didn't want to go, but I went anyway. And looking back, I probably been better off had I gone more. But I do have recollections of Dr. Zander, rather a nice-looking, powerful man. And then the one who followed him, I believe, was John Rilling. Rilling came there in the early part of the war. I remember him very well, and he was quite an old man also, just died not too many years ago. And his widow, of course, died just a very short period ago. Following him was Dr. Frederick Ferdinand Miller, spelled his last name M-U-E-L-L-E-R. I remember him very vividly. He was a very nice man, not very dynamic, Ph.D. from Yale, on the erudite side, and I remember one of the things about him back in those days on Reformation Sundays, standing up in the pulpit and just breaking the Roman Catholic Church over the coals. Now, this day and age, that would not be done. And even at that time, it bothered me a little bit. But I can see him now and hear him now just taking the Church of Rome to task for all the evils they had perpetrated on this country and so forth everywhere. And I remember driving home from church one time after one of these sessions, and as we drove by St. Rachel's, my father said, well, we don't want to run over any Catholics, but if we did, it might make Dr. Miller happy. That's a true statement. Believe me, it is. But he was a nice man, and of course, he gained most of his fame in Springfield after his retarded son, Dickie, was diagnosed with having Down syndrome and some other problems. He founded the Residential Center for Retarded Children, and that is his legacy, and a very fine one. And here again, he died not too many years ago. Okay, so we're up to Dr. Miller, who left, I think, he came in 45 and left probably about 1955. And going back a little bit further, my grandfather Zimmerman's sister married a man from up in northeast Ohio. They all came from up around Mahoning County, up around Washingtonville and Columbiana County, and that part of the state. Uncle Emor W. Simon, S-I-M-O-N, was pastor of the First Lutheran Church back in the period about 1895 to 1900. And he lived to be an old man. He died about 1948, and I remember him very well. His daughter Ruth lived up to about 15 years ago and died at Wilmington. She was born in 1896 and died in 1992, so she would be 96 years old. Very active in Trinity Church up in Akron. After Dr. Miller left First Lutheran Church, he was succeeded by the Reverend Lawrence T. Rue, who served as pastor, I would say, from about 1956 until about 85, in the late 80s somewhere. It was a long time, as I recall.
He served 31 years.
Now, that make about, he came in around 56 or 57 and left in the late 1980s. Very fine man, a fine-looking man with a beautiful voice, and who really was ushered in the era of the modern pastor in the Lutheran Church, as far as I'm concerned. Very broad-minded on a lot of issues, and on Reformation Sunday certainly didn't do what Dr. Miller did. I mean that seriously. Pastor Rue had a magnificent singing voice. He'd served in the Air Force and had seen combat duty over Japan at the end of World War II, and had a lot of experiences that none of the former pastors had as far as I knew. We became very good friends with him and his wife Connie, who met an untimely death within sometime in the early 1970s. She was killed in an automobile accident. Pastor Rue had a big influence on me. I could relate to him better than any of these previous persons because we were more like the same age and had the same type of background. He had his father here to help him, the Reverend Meade A. Rue, who originated in Pennsylvania and was not named after General Meade, but was named after a man who was named after General Meade, who of course won the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. And the Reverend Meade Rue served a number of years and died, I don't remember the year, but somewhere back there in the late 70s or early 80s.
And his widow just died about a year ago, I believe.
Meade Rue was way up in her 90s when she died, that's right. I remember her very well too. And Pastor Rue left in, as I say, about 1986, I think we decided, somewhere like 86 or 87. Still around, still does supply work. I see him on occasion. He's got a lot of trouble with his hip. And of course, right now, he would be, let's see, I was born about 1921, so he's going to be about 77 years old this year. He was succeeded. We had an interim pastor there for a while, and the Reverend David Imhoff came in 1990, and is now leaving this year after 8 years. I probably can think of a lot of stories about these various men and their families. I can't really put my finger on anything really outstanding at the present time, except that it was interesting to see the change that the pastors had. Pastor Rue, for instance, and Pastor Imhoff's attitude toward minorities, toward the Roman Catholic Church is 180 degrees different than it was as opposed to the ones who had preceded them. But of course, that was a difference in era, difference in background. And you know, a lot of times, a lot of us like to think now that rather than being Lutherans, we're kind of Reformed Catholics. The way our approach is to a lot of things, we're not too far apart from the Roman Church, although there are a lot of basic differences. But I'm very satisfied and content on being a Lutheran because the Lutheran Church does preserve the traditions of the early church, and we celebrate a lot of the saints' days that the Catholic Church does, and like educationally, it's far and above any of the other Protestant churches.
Going back to the early days in your youth, you remember there was a Zimmerman men's class in the Sunday school. Tell about it.
Well, that was pretty much, by the time I was born, that was not functioning very much anymore. My grandfather, when I was born, he was 70.
What was his first name?
John Luther Zimmerman was his name, and he had a Sunday school class. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, which he started back in the early 1900s, and at one time was the largest Sunday school class in Springfield or Clark County. There's a favorite story they tell about that. He was a very active trial lawyer, and the opposing attorneys in any jury trial would invariably ask members of the prospective panel if any of them ever been a member of John L. Zimmerman's Sunday school class, because he didn't want any of those people on that jury if my grandfather was the opposing lawyer, because he probably believed everything he told them back there in the old days. But that, by the time I was born, that Sunday school class had pretty much, I won't say it literally died out, but it was not the same, did not have the same reputation it had before. But we were all brought up and very active in the church, and I am, until this day, I have a younger brother and sister. My sister comes on occasion. My brother went all through confirmation, but has turned into an agnostic. He respects the church and he admires the church, but he's what we call, he's not a believer. And we do not discuss it, and he has his beliefs and I have mine. We get along just fine.
What's his first name?
Richard was my younger brother. He's 3 years younger than I am. I remember his baptism down in the church one Sunday afternoon. I think it might have been Dr. Markwood who baptized him. And later on, my sister was baptized by Dr. Elmer Flack, whom you probably remember, who was dean of the Hamlet Divinity School, or Hamlet Seminary, they called it. He was, my sister was baptized in my grandparents' house on my father's birthday in 1941 up on East High Street. He came out there to do it. Dr. Willing was away for some reason and couldn't do it, so Dr. Flack did it.
Wasn't there a story about Dr. Zander using some kind of music in the pulpit?
You know, I can't really tell you about that, because that's one story I never heard. He left there, I would say, in the early 1940 or 41, and I was only 10 years old then. And then John Willing came in.
Yeah, we came here in 43, and John had just arrived.
Right, and very fine man, a little on the erudite side, and very intellectual, I thought, but not a whole lot of one-on-one personality, but a very good man. Lawrence Rue had a tremendous amount of charisma, and Lawrence Rue had trained at one time to be on the stage, had a magnificent voice, and he would have done very well at that also. But
the thing I remember particularly about Dr. Willing was exactly as you described him. He was erudite. He was not a person of sociability, but boy, that man memorized every sermon, and he could really deliver it.
Yes, he could. He had a great fund of knowledge as regards literature, American and English literature. He could, rattle off the names and the works of various poets and writers, and which was all well and good, but sometimes when it came down to the nuts and bolts of life, it didn't do that much for me, frankly, and I thought Rue and Imhoff both have been very good at that, of really relating problems we have today with the Scriptures, because they're of a newer breed of pastor, I think, really, Not that they didn't know about a lot of these writers, but I think they felt it was a little more important to be able to handle the problems that are going to be confronted in 1997 rather than quoting some English poet in the 15th century or something.
I'm very happy at what Imhoff has done with putting the congregation to work in the community.
It's unbelievable. The interest he has stimulated down there, and we've taken 2 very good motor trips, the tours, and I've never heard anybody complain about any of those trips or tours. We had great times, and I really miss him, but, I keep saying no one's indispensable or irreplaceable either, and I suspect we'll get somebody else in there that we'll like too, but he was what we needed at the right time, I think. And a guy that you could have a real good time with, and was pretty ornery in his own right.
Right.
Yeah. Some of his jokes, I'm still a little embarrassed to repeat, but they were pretty funny anyway.
What do you remember about the appearance of the sanctuary itself? I remember once it was on a sloping floor.
Yes, that was an old building, and they had no center aisle for years, and it was designed as a good many churches that were designed back in the late 19th century. They had entirely different setup as we do now. And the thing, when Lawrence, Pastor Rue was responsible for modernizing the sanctuary, I believe, shortly after, probably in the early 60s. I remember they put in all new pews, the center aisle, which we had never had before, because I remember weddings, they always had to go up the side aisles rather than the center aisle. And I remember you, Dr. Matthies, helping out at communion a lot in those days, picking up the glasses. As a matter of fact, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 1943, Dr. Willing tried me out as a vocalist because he was trying to replace the quartet.
Yes, I don't remember the quartet. I read a lot about it, but I do remember you're being in the choir and doing a number of solos at one time. And I think my Uncle John was in that choir too back there in those days to some extent. But they did have a quartet down there, and Paul Matthies was a vocalist, a paid vocalist, who was not a member of the congregation, as I understand it. He had a magnificent singing voice. I can remember him singing solos during services and weddings, as a matter of fact.
We were paid $25 a month.
Wow, that's not bad.
I sang there from 43 until 1950, when I developed a node on my vocal cord and had to quit.
Well, I never sang in the choir. I can sing reasonably well, but I do not have a trained voice. But over the years, I was pretty active down there on various committees and on the council, and I've enjoyed being a member of that church, and I've gotten a lot out of it, and especially from, all the pastors, but especially, I would say Pastor Rue had more influence on me than anybody else. I don't know why, just the right time, the right place. But they're all fine men that had no problem with any of them. I don't remember Dr. Zander very well, but I do remember Dr. Willing, Dr. Miller, and Pastor, and of course, Imhoff, just those four.
You remember something about the ushers that we used to have, such as Art Lytle?
Clarence Hutzel, somebody named Clarence Hutzel, and then the Barrett twins, and their father. Yeah. Yes, I remember all those. I remember all those people, you know,
It'd be good to get their names on the record.
yeah, there was Bob and Dick Barrett, and they had a business called Barrett Brothers. They printed legal forms. I don't remember the name of their father, other than Barrett. I don't remember what his first name was.
No.
They were both graduates from Miami University. Both of them were fine basketball and baseball players, and later on excellent golfers. I remember them very well. And one of my Sunday school teachers, his name was Reinheimer. Remember the Reinheimers down there? Yeah, I can't remember what his first name was.
Yeah.
And
George Ringcliffe?
George Ringcliffe, and of course Myrtle Grace Rogers was a legend down there over the years.
Yeah.
And some of the ushers, I can see some of those men, but I really can't remember them that well.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember one named Clarence Hutzel, and Tom Bennett was there for a long time as an usher and very active on the council. And I served a lot of those fellows back there. Bob Bruce, Doc Barrett, who was not related to the Barrett brothers, but maybe distantly, whose widow Betty Barrett just died here about 6 months ago. She was 94 or something like that.
Who was the man who kept his hand in his coat pocket that was an usher?
I can't remember.
Can you place it?
No, I can't
No?
remember that, no. I really don't remember that one. John Coons was another one. There's a man we got to talk about.
All right.
My father always said that John Coons was there every time the door was open, and it seemed that way, but anytime we went to church, John Coons was doing something. He was always there, and he was an usher good bit of the time. And he lived to be way up in his 80s. I think he just died, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe.
Right.
And his widow just died here a few years ago. And a lot of them seem to live a pretty long time.
Mm-hmm. John was very active, as I remember, as the head of the construction committee for the reconstruction.
And also the building next door, I believe. Was he involved in that? I can't remember that or not. The new building next door where where the offices and the Sunday school room.
I'm sure he was.
Yeah. Yeah, he was down. He was very, very active. Homer McFadden
Oh, yes.
was another one who was quite a character. And I remember him very, very well. A big, powerfully built man. He was an excellent football player at Wittenberg and a good athlete all his life, practically. He and his wife both, I think, were active down there for many years.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't remember.
Yeah, it brings. Yeah. How do you see the? I know it's kind of a rough question to answer. How do you see the future of First Lutheran in the downtown location?
Well, I've had to, Pastor Imhoff's last sermon made me think about that again. And I think that we're on the right track. I think by supporting organizations like Habitat, and I'm pretty active with Habitat on their legal counsel and their real estate closure. Things like that, I think, really help the church to maintain a constructive presence. And I think by linking up with Central Methodist, Christ Episcopal, St. John's Lutheran, and just trying to keep an eye on things and working together is all we can do. I don't have any answer to it. I know it's a problem, and I think what Imhoff has done has been especially beneficial, and I think that's one reason the bishop recommended him for this position, because he had a reputation of stirring up interest in a church like that, which he certainly has done. I think the membership has improved in quality and quantity-wise, and the activities, of course, are very, very are very far-ranging. And he was an excellent pastor for the younger people. It's just unbelievable what he did down there, and I'm really very sorry to see him leave. And he's going to be a hard man to replace, but as I say, someone will do it. But I think the church will always be there. But it is a little different than being in a suburban church. Although it's never bothered me any. I like going to church and doing what I can, and the fact it's a downtown church doesn't affect me one way or the other than being aware of what some of the problems might be.
I've heard people say, I don't think I should help endowing the financial strength of a downtown church. I don't know why the people that come on later shouldn't take care of their own problems. How do you react?
Well, I think that's pretty short-sighted, really, because, it's I think you've got to recognize where the church is and what it's doing, and if you're an active member now, you've got to take care of it now and leave some sort of a legacy. I do know that we've had several parishioners who have left very large estates in recent years who have never left a dime to the church, and I think probably because they thought they did enough while they were alive. And this is really one I'm thinking of, which seems a terrible shock to everybody, you know.
Yeah.
And then Betty Barrett left with just a minimal. And that's their business. I have never once, when I've been writing wills for these people, ever once tried to influence them in that direction. Only very subtly sometimes if they weren't sure what to do. But, you know, I think a lot of them felt they've given of their own time and their own money while they're alive, and they want to leave their estate somewhere else, and that's certainly their privilege, you know. I have provided in my will, both mine and my wife's will, to some extent, for the church, but both of us have been associated with different colleges and universities. You like to remember them too.
Right. We've tried something in our trust agreement. We've provided for sustaining our present giving for an indefinite number of years.
That's very fine. I've never run across anybody that's wanted to do that. Usually it's just a lump sum bequest, you know. But because that's what they count on is the relying upon a fixed amount of money coming in, and that certainly would help support that sort of approach. Yeah. Good point.
Any other things you want to toss in about the church?
I can remember years ago going on these church outings. With looking back, I can't remember. I remember people like Bill Haynes, who's still active down there.
The Colonel?
And his father. I remember him in a military uniform in the 1930s because he was in the Ohio National Guard before World War II even started in Europe. And he worked, I think, at Navistar, it's called International Harvester. But he was very active in the Ohio National Guard back before 1939, because I remember seeing him in his uniform on occasion.
I interviewed him on behalf of the church and had a hard time keeping the Colonel on score.
Yeah. He's about 94 now, and he says just what he means. You can tell he's a retired colonel. And I still call him Colonel because I think he likes it.
Oh, he loves it.
Yeah, I wouldn't call him anything else but Colonel. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah.
I almost want to salute him after you get through talking.
I had a lot of fun interviewing him because he'd put all these cuss words in too, you know.
Oh, yeah. You just seen, you know, and he's very, he's outspoken about it, you know. He's getting along pretty well. He still lives at home. He has somebody that stays over there, comes in and looks after him. But and physically, he gets around pretty well, I think, because I think he's about 94 at this point.
Yeah. Well, let's switch to the Zimmerman family. But let's, first of all, before I forget, your charming wife was not a Lutheran.
No, she wasn't.
How did you wind up with
Because
that?
I was a better Lutheran and she was Methodist, that's why. I have nothing against the Methodists at all. You know, anybody's belief is his or her business. But it wasn't for me, and when I was brought up in a liturgical background, to go to a Methodist church. And plus they have, well, let's put it this way, Lutherans have a pretty broad viewpoint on one's social conduct. I mean, I think Martin Luther felt that, you know, good works don't get you into heaven, and then how you really feel about things and so forth. And I think it's a lot better than saying, you know, I don't drink, I don't swear, therefore I'm going to heaven. And I think a lot of these Protestant churches have fallen into that sort of a belief, you know, it's all negative, you know, we don't do this, we don't do that. And I'm not saying that Luther didn't believe you had to lead a noble life, but a good godly life. At the same time, you didn't have to advertise how great you were, you know, to reach salvation. But my wife has become a very devoted Lutheran, and in fact has told me that she could not go back. It would be awfully tough for her to return to the Methodist approach on everything. But that's if they want to believe it, that's fine, and they may be right for all I know. But I'm much more comfortable where I am. That's why. Nice of you, Matthew.
I imagine she has a rough time discussing these things with her mother.
Yes, sometimes she does. And at the same time, you know, no one wants to change. You know.
Her mother's a lovely person. We're enjoying her here.
Yeah, and her Aunt Libby Sullivan's another one who's been a pillar of that church up there.
That's her aunt?
Yeah, that's Nancy's father's sister.
I never got that connection.
Elizabeth Sullivan is Nancy's father's sister, and she sang in the choir up about 2 years ago, and very active in the church up there. And of course, you know her. Everybody around here does.
Right, yeah. Well, now, let's switch to the fact that you were at Wittenberg University.
I started at Muhlenberg College in 1949
Why?
because I wanted to go away to school. I did better. I'd gone to prep school a year after high school and done very well. I'd gone away to school, and my parents felt that a school away from home would help me. And we looked at Gettysburg and Muhlenberg both, and I liked Muhlenberg better.
Hmm.
Even though it's an all-male school, there was plenty of social life there. Really, there's a women's college in the same city. And I spent 2 years at Muhlenberg. And at the end of my second year, was right in the middle of the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not have a major yet, even though my family all been lawyers and judges. I had not made up my mind what I wanted to do. And so at the end of at the second year, I joined the Navy because I always wanted to do that, and I thought maybe I would mature and develop, and I served 32 months in active duty, mostly around San Diego and in the near Pacific. And while I was in the Navy, I decided that's what I wanted to do, and I started working toward it from that time on. I got out of the Navy in 1954, and at that time you could go to law school with 3 years of college.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished 1 year at Wittenberg and went to the University of Cincinnati in the fall of 1955, graduated in 1958, and it'll be 40 years this year in October.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined my Uncle John Zimmerman in the practice of law. He died in 1980, so I've been on my own since then. But I'm very thankful for what went on before me as far as my grandfather and father and uncle were concerned. But you do learn one thing, that you can't live on your ancestors' reputation. Because people forget pretty soon who they are. And if you don't produce, we're going someplace else. But it certainly gave me an advantage. And I'm very happy to say that I feel I've taken full advantage of it. After me, there won't be any more. I have no children, and my sister's children are not interested. But that's something that really doesn't bother me very much. 100 years from now, it won't make much difference one way or the other.
Now, your sister and her children are who?
My sister is Helen Zimmerman Stevens. She lives out on East County Line Road. She has 3 children, Kathleen, Eric, and David. And none of them really have much interest. They didn't go on to school after high school, and they're all pretty good kids, but they have no interest. And so with me, there's nobody in the family to come along behind me, really. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your experience at the University of Cincinnati Law School was a good one?
Yes, that's just one. It was between Ohio State and Cincinnati, and I always liked the city of Cincinnati better than Columbus. Plus, it was a smaller law school. We had about 150 down there when I was there, and Ohio State had 300 or 400. Plus, Ohio State and Columbus were a huge complex. That's a huge complex over there. And I really enjoyed Cincinnati, and to this day, I have kept a pretty close contact with a lot of my classmates and the university. And the law school down there was the oldest one in the state of Ohio by far. I was founded way back in the early 1800s.
All right.
My father was on the Supreme Court of Ohio for 36 years. And in fact, the whole time he went on in 1933 and died in 1969. I was born in 1931, so in fact, my entire remembrance of him was on the court. And he died doing that sort of thing. My grandfather had been a lawyer for 60 years, and my Uncle John, when he died in 1980, had been a lawyer for, for almost 60 years. And my father, of course, died in 1969, and he's been a lawyer for 56 years. So all of them had a lot of longevity.
And their wives' names?
Okay, my father's wife's name was Dorothy G. Zimmerman. She died in 1983. My grandfather, she was 82 when she died. 84, she died in 84 at age 82. My grandfather's Zimmerman's wife, Helen Ballard Zimmerman, lived in 1953. She was 88 when she died. And my Uncle John's wife was Kari Ness Zimmerman. Her father was head of the classical language department at Wittenberg back in the 30s. She died in 1996, and she was 96 years old. So they all lived pretty long lives. And my uncle died in 1980 to age 83. So my father was 78 when he died. He lived a shorter time than any of them. They were all the Zimmermans were. My grandfather never went to law school. Because in those days, a lot of them read law, and he read law for 3 years in a lawyer's office, and took an examination in front of the Supreme Court, an oral examination in those days. As you probably recall, we all took written examinations later on.
I took the first one in Indiana in 1934.
First written examination, yeah. Up to that time, it had been oral examination.
Yeah.
My father and uncle then were both, I won't say forced to go, but were sent to Harvard Law School. My father did not like Harvard Law School. He had come out, he'd gone to a private school here in Springfield, and had graduated from college at age 9. He was just barely, he was 19, almost 20 when he graduated. Didn't like going away from home too much, and he was sent down to Harvard. And after 2 years at Harvard, he took the bar exam and passed it, and never went back. You could do that in those days. But I've run across some of his letters home from Harvard, and he did not have a good time. I think he was younger than a lot of those people, and a lot of his classmates came from Eastern prep schools and Eastern universities, whereas he came right out of Springfield, Clark County, Ohio, Wittenberg College. Much different environment. But my Uncle John went the whole 3 years, and part of his service was interrupted because of World War I. And he got along pretty well down there, but my father just never had a very fond remembrance of Harvard Law School.
What was your father's graduating date from Wittenberg?
1911. He was born on June 22nd, 1891. He graduated in early June of 1911, so he was still not 20 years old when he graduated. But he went to a couple of private schools in Springfield, the elementary school and the high school. Wittenberg Academy was the school that he went to for high school, and you probably heard of it. It went out of existence back in the 30s, I think, but it was a high school curriculum that Wittenberg College operated, and he picked up an extra year there because they did it 3 years like the high schools did in 4 back in those days.
Wasn't that at Blair Hall?
Yeah, that's right. Blair Hall was the old Wittenberg Academy.
Yeah.
But he was a loyal Wittenberger all his life, and so was my grandfather, who was treasurer for 40 years, and my uncle and I both were pretty active over there in a lot of different capacities. And I have a great deal of affection for Wittenberg College, Wittenberg University. It's a fine school, and I have many fond remembrances over there in all phases of the university.
How does the legal profession in Clark County stack up these days from the standpoint of your very personal opinion of their quality?
Well, one thing that I noticed that when I was admitted back there in 1958, most of the guys had come in from Ohio State or Cincinnati, Ohio Northern, established universities. In recent years, there's been a big influx of students from law schools like Capital University, which is the old Franklin YMCA school over there, and University of Dayton started up again. They turned out some pretty good lawyers. It just seems like intellectually, a lot of the younger lawyers are not up to a par as I remember them when I started. And I don't know whether that's, probably my age has something to do with that. But there are some excellent young lawyers who come out of Capital and UD, but it's just a different approach anymore. When I started, we had a much smaller bar, and you knew everybody very well, and you didn't have to worry about anybody figuratively stabbing you in the back. Now I'm not so sure, because it's very competitive and very mercenary, and fortunately the type of practice that I'm in now, which is mostly probate and real estate, you don't have the confrontation. But in the old days when we were doing divorces and criminal work, you really felt that no one would really take undue advantage of you. I mean, you had to represent your client, but I'm not so sure about some of these younger guys, whether I trust them very far at all. They thought they could gain some kind of advantage on you. The biggest thing is the advertising in Yellow Pages. Now, I think,
sickening, isn't it?
yes. And I think it's fine that, and I do this, I have a little box there that tells what I do. And then people don't call me for divorces or criminal defense work. But so many of them have put on these garish ads with, red, white, and blue colors and arrows, and I am the greatest, that sort of thing. And I specialize, or I operate in a lot of real estate areas, and so many of these fellows and women who put up who put out that they're real estate lawyers, I wouldn't trust them to write a deed, and that's the truth.
I've seen some.
Pretty bad. I mean, it really is. And the trouble with advertising is, if you don't produce, your clients don't wonder why, since you hold yourself out as being the #1 expert in everything, especially guys on television, which I don't see how they get by with some of it. And here again, I think it's fine for a lawyer, as doctors have for years, is to advertise your specialty. Therefore, you don't get calls from people who want you to do something you don't do. I think what they do, though, is blowing one's old horn and trying to write Muhammad Ali, but I am the greatest, is wrong. But unfortunately, when so many other people are doing it, I guess if you're in that mode, you've got to do it too to protect yourself. That's the unfortunate part about it.
Are we oversupplied?
With lawyers?
Yeah.
I wondered about that too. I know that most of us are pretty busy all the time. And I'll give you one example. When I started in 1958, the juvenile court consisted of Judge Graham, who was any babies. You probably remember it.
Yes.
Harry G. Graham.
The old candy maker.
Yep. Yes. He had two elderly assistants, women assistants, Adelaide Milligan and Alice Stewart, and a bailiff, and maybe some sheriff's deputy would help, and that was it. Now they must have a staff of 50 or 60 in juvenile court. And it's just, I was talking to Joe Modern the other day, who's our, and he was just shaking his head about the amount of work they've got down there. And of course, there were fewer people in those days. The drug problem was not acute; it didn't even exist at that time. And now, in the same way, if your domestic problems, that has just gone out of control. I mean, 1 out of 2 marriages end up in divorce or dissolution, and someone's got to represent those people. But I think the juvenile end of it, especially, is just there's a striking difference now as there was 30, 40 years ago, because they got by with one ancient judge and no referees, and just practically no clerical help at all. Nowadays, they've got a building down there, and I bet there's 50 people involved in the juvenile court system now. I'm just talking about probation officers and secretaries and clerks and everything else. And they do have some referees down there in their cases, so the judge doesn't have to do everything.
Now, Judge Matthies, having had the job divided, what does he do anymore?
That's probably, if I were younger, I would like to have that job for a couple of terms, because it's low key. You do have some excitement up there. Sometimes there's some problems concerning fiduciaries embezzling money and not making accounts properly, and sometimes you get into some confrontations. And I've been involved as a lawyer with some of those, and they can get pretty nasty sometimes too, where a member of the family is the executor or guardian or holds the power of attorney and proceeds to wipe out the old person's funds, and you can get some pretty nasty situations there, and I say exciting is quote unquote, but it's not all just signing entries up there either. He has quite a bit to do. Another thing to do, lawyers are notorious for delaying things, not getting things done, unfortunately. And it's awfully easy to fall into that, but the Supreme Court of Ohio has laid down a number of guidelines on all trial court, at the trial court level, about getting cases processed and closed. And that's probably his biggest headache, is getting these probate cases wrapped up and closed. Because if the lawyers don't do it, and the lawyer dies or retires or disappears, it's pretty tough to get them done. And the heirs are gone somewhere, and you can't find the executor anymore, and you've got an estate there that's got some assets in it that you don't know what to do with. That's another big problem down there. And he keeps on us pretty well about that. And he has to, because the Supreme Court wants to know why he doesn't.
This is his exclusive job now, isn't it?
Probate court.
Yeah.
And it is a little less there's less mess in there. You don't have all the horrible personal problems as you do in the juvenile court, but you can get into some pretty unhappy situations over the way estates are handled by lawyers and by the fiduciaries, usually involving this application of funds, to put it mildly. And you and I both know several lawyers here in Springfield who've gone down the tubes, And one in particular, which I'm not going to mention now, is lucky to get indicted by the grand jury. Several of them have been lucky to get indicted by the grand jury.
Do you see the opportunity for lawyers today to get together into larger firms as against the one big firm we have?
Well, yeah, we have all kinds here. We have a lot of still 1- and 2-man firms, and we have some larger ones. And in my case, even when I was with my uncle, we were not partners. We had our own. We shared expenses. But I think it's, I don't think there's been any big trend one way or the other.
It's a good mix.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to know this day and age. I mean, the environmental thing and sexual harassment, things like this. I mean, and which I wouldn't have the slightest idea where to begin. That's why in my little box in the yellow pages, you see just what I do there, probate and real estate, and general civil practice, and I get very few calls. I maybe get one call a year on a domestic case. And I don't handle any of that anymore. I'll handle a dissolution as long as it's pretty clean and the people that, really are one out of a thing, there's no big controversy, but sometimes those can get a little nasty too.
One of the areas of your specialty was my specialty before I came here, that of being an abstract and title insurance attorney.
Yeah, I do a lot of that.
I imagine you're tied into that pretty much.
Yeah, I'm a title agent for 2 title insurance companies, and I do mortgage loan closings for several lenders, but I'm trying to keep that under control, because one nice thing about it is you get paid because you end up writing the checks, and you always write yourself one, but it's a lot of work putting those closings together, as you know, in your own experience. But you hate to turn it down because you're afraid next time they'll call somebody else.
Do you serve a particular institution in Springfield?
No. You mean like a bank? No. I'm an approved loan closer probably for 10 or 15 different mortgage lenders, many of whom don't even have offices here. But we do operate this at the end of the day, representatives of different real estate offices around here take applications,
Do you feel that all of the publicity that I think it's been good about writing your wills and getting involved in the thinking about whether one needs a revocable trust or not, do you think that this is really being absorbed by the public?
Well, I think the public, yes, and I think in some cases it's very good, but the public has developed a very negative attitude toward probate and probate court.
I have found that out.
Because they feel that the lawyers and the courts somehow are going to get everything they have. And there's a place for the revocable trust, the living trust. There is. But one thing I point out to people is if you have an executor appointed in your will, the probate judge is on his back if he doesn't get it done. If you appoint your cousin or brother-in-law as trustee, no one's sitting on him at all. And if he doesn't want to do it or can't do it, what do? You have nothing to turn to. And there's still a big misconception among people. They somehow feel that by going through the living trust business, that they're going to avoid the estate tax, and of course they're not. And a lot of people have been very upset when they found they paid some of these outfits $1,500 to do a $300 job, and find out later that there is estate tax. And there's a big misconception there, and there's a lot of people who are very suspicious of probate, and I think it's just, I won't say it's a passing fancy, but I think that people are going to wake up someday to realize that probate ain't all bad. So that's what I'm saying.
One of the characters that I advised when I first started on this thing over at Elderly United had a total estate of $60,000, and he was sold a $1,000 fee for a trust from some character out of Columbus.
I had one person who's right over here in Northern States had a house worth about $50,000, maybe $10,000 in the bank, an automobile. She went all through that. I think she spent like $1,500, and then the idea was to convey the property into the trustee's name. Well, it wasn't done correctly, so when she died, we had to administer the estate anyway, because it was a defective deed. The deed that had been used was not set up properly to do that. Therefore, the conveyance was no good, so she died owning the property rather than the trust. And her son was really upset. He was really mad. He didn't want her to do it to begin with. And he called up this guy in Columbus, and of course, it didn't do any good. But I had to settle the estate, so they didn't escape probate simply because mechanically there was a defect in the procedure that was presented to her.
What do you do about insisting on recording the trust agreement to perfect the title?
Well, it's okay to, if you're going to put your property in the trust, you've got to convey it to a named fiduciary. A lot of people what they're doing are conveying it to the Smith Family Trust, which is not an entity. It's got to go to John Smith, trustee. And we're running, and I do a lot of this real estate title work, and we're running across a lot of these that are really going to cause some trouble someday because they're being conveyed into a grantee who is a non-entity.
Now, if you were examining that title,
I tell them that title's no good and that they have to, do some reconstruction work on it. Because the conveyance never was any good, the property is still back in the name of the grantor who conveyed it.
but suppose that it was a good trustee, would you still want to see the agreement?
Yes. Yeah, you have to make sure. Well, if it just goes into the name of someone as trustee, it's called a blind trust, and that's okay, but you don't have to inquire. But recently, I think right now, I'm not real sure what the status is. The legislature enacted the law that you had to record the trust. But then I think that there's been some controversy about that, so it's a little bit up in the air right now. And there's not as many of these trusts coming in now as there were 3 or 4 years ago. I think the problem was there's a lot of people out there who are not lawyers instructing people what to do out of a book, see.
Right.
And I've seen some really bad real estate titles, like the Smith Family Trust, which it's got to be in the name of an individual. But a lot of people have this bias against probate because they're just convinced, and the lawyer's going to get paid anyway, one way or the other, because the trustee's got to hire a lawyer to do the estate tax return for him.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's maybe not quite as popular a way to do things anymore. People maybe have come to believe that maybe the old-fashioned way really is the best way, because you do have a court and a judge that it goes through, and if you go into a problem, you have recourse. You can get a hearing in front of somebody who has some authority. The trustee doesn't do it right. What do you do?
Have to sue him.
Yeah, sue him in a common pleas court. Yeah, that's what you do.
Yeah. Okay. How about the future from the standpoint of general business climate of Clark County?
Well, I lived in Clark County for 67 years, and it's always had a slow, steady growth. And I think right now we are enjoying a tremendous period of prosperity, as the whole country is. And I think this has always been a pretty solid area here, and I think it will continue to be so. I grew up as a small boy in the Depression, and I remember the WPA and the men coming to the back door wanting a handout. And we were lucky in that my father had gone on the Springfield, Ohio in 1934, at a salary of $12,000 a year, which is an awful lot of money in those days, as you can remember too. And he lived on $12,000 a year up through the Second World War, and it was a darn good income. He had some independent income, not a whole lot, but he lived pretty well in the Depression. But I know a lot of people didn't. I really do. But I think that this county will really see some ups and downs. But I think we've had an active Chamber of Commerce, and I think the citizens from all parts of the community have been very active in trying to do the right thing for the community, like the sales tax for the what I want to
For
say.
the Clark County Historical.
That went through without a ripple of opposition.
I was utterly amazed.
I was afraid that some of these activists around here would really start a campaign, and it was hard, and it just went through as a matter of course.
I came down to a county commissioners meeting to listen to the protests. Only one person got up, and all he did was ask a question for clarification.
Yeah. And I think people realize this is just going to really help this community.
Yeah.
I'm just all in favor of it. I've always been in favor of this one.
Well, by all means, get down and see the warehouse.
Yeah, I've got to do that.
You know where it's located?
Not sure which one.
Well, you remember where the Holiday Inn is on West Main, way out?
Yes, I do.
Thompson Street.
Yeah, I know exactly where it is. Yeah.
You turn in, and this was the old tack industry.
Yeah, I know where it is.
Do you?
Yeah, I know where it is.
Every item that the Historical Society owns is now identified, marked by color, and inventory.
I hope that building's fireproof.
Yeah, it's all metal.
Yeah, thank God. That'd be awful,
Yeah.
I'm involved to some extent. I don't know how much I'm going to get involved in. I've always been a model railroad buff, and there's an antique model railroad club here who wants to try to get something set up down there too, about what the old Big Bore station looked like, and a regular model HO layout.
Yeah.
I've been to a couple of meetings, and they're making some progress. It's a question of getting enough people who want to work on it. Because, and what's the name of the fellow who did the downtown block? It's going to be coordinated with that.
He's got that there too.
Yeah, we saw it Saturday, and I can't recall his name.
What we plan to do is recreate the old New York Central Station, the Pennsylvania Station, and the DT&I influence here, and put it all together down there and coordinate it with his center, his downtown Springfield.
You remember the old one-car Pullman, Pennsylvania car?
Yes, I do.
Maxine went home on that, pregnant,
Yeah.
to have Dick delivered back home.
Yes. In fact, I remember they had 2 trains a day out of there back in the 30s. They had one that left at 11, and we both went to Chicago.
Yeah.
And then there's the one that left about 11 in the morning, and there's one at about 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Which is probably the one you took.
Yeah, overnight.
But we took, my mother's from Salt Lake City, and we used to go out there in the summer for about a month on the train on the Union Pacific out of Chicago.
Yeah.
We would take that train from Springfield at 11 o'clock in the morning. We'd get up there in Chicago late in the afternoon. And I remember taking a cab over to I was only like 4 years old, but that's, we've got photographs of all those places to work from. I don't know how much I'm going to be involved in it. And I've got my own layout at home, and I like to tinker with, and that's not my wife because I spend too much time with that as a dad.
There were two men there yesterday, or Saturday, measuring every automobile length and width and height, and everything on display there, they measure.
Yeah.
So they know exactly where it's going to go.
Yeah, I know. It's really fascinating.
Unbelievable what they have to do.
And with the good fortune of having this money come in so fast, they were able to hire professionals to do a job.
Yeah, I know some of these guys who are retired are can't wait to get started on this railroad stuff, really.
Yeah.
They're going to do it out. One of the fellows has a big garage out here in the county somewhere. I'm doing it in sections. So you move it around, take it other places.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, as I say, how much time I'm going to have to spend on that.
Well, you're not getting old yet.
Today's my 67th birthday.
Well, congratulations.
20 years younger than you are.
That we'd have had a cake.
Yeah, well, I've got one at home, thank you. I hope.
Yeah, I was just about ready to vote when you were born.
Yeah, that's right.
Barbara was 58 in October.
Yeah, I'll be darned. How old's Dick now?
52.
Oh, God, I
Last
can't.
July.
It's hard to believe. When he's just a little kid.
Yeah.
Listen, is there any more? Because
Just fine.
Yeah, I like to talk about Springfield, about things I've seen around here, as you found out. And I've got a pretty good memory on that sort of thing.
You sure have. You got these dates.
Yeah,
It's
my father was
remarkable.
awfully good at that, and I kind of got it from him, and he was just he was a history buff also, and so am I. And I obviously was interested in historical things. You remember dates, you have to.
Charles, we have come to the end of a 1-hour tape, and I have enjoyed this interview thoroughly, period. I know that it will be a boon to the archives of both the Clark County Historical Society and First Lutheran Church, period. Your recollection of dates has been fantastic, exclamation point. Thank you very much for your willingness to share and for your affability during the interview, period. Barbara, this is the end of the interview. I simply wanted to make sure that the message is coming back to you clearly, period. I am still having some difficulty with this machine in replaying the sounds back to me clearly without a squeal. And I surely hope that it will not be laborious for you, good friend.